Greetings friends. Thanks for stopping by for a visit. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe.
I don't really know how to start this, and honestly I've gone back and deleted this a few times already. I'm not someone who posts stuff like this, and I'm definitely not the kind of person that believes in whatever this falls under. But I can't keep it to myself anymore. It's been messing with my sleep, and I catch myself thinking about it at random times during the day. I'm an older guy, been living alone for a while now. Northeast Wisconsin, out near the Lake Michigan side. Real rural. My nearest neighbor's a good distance down the road, and behind my place it's just woods that run for miles. Nights out here are quiet in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. No traffic, no people, just wind, trees, and the lake if you're close enough to hear it. I've lived here long enough to know what normal looks like. I know the sounds, the patterns, what belongs and what doesn't. I spend a lot of evenings outside, just sitting on the porch or standing out in the yard looking at the sky. It's one of the few things I still enjoy doing. You see planes sometimes, the occasional satellite, shooting stars if you're lucky. What I saw a few nights ago wasn't any of that. I've been trying to come up with a reasonable explanation before posting this. Something simple, something that makes sense. But I keep coming back to the same conclusion, and I don't like it. I just need to write this out and see if anyone else has had something even remotely similar happen to them. Because right now, I don't really know what to think. Before all of this, things were simple, maybe even boring to most people, but I liked it that way. I've been out here a long time, long enough that the days kind of blend together in a steady rhythm. I wake up early, usually before the sun's fully up, make some coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and look out toward the trees while the light comes in. No rush to anything. I keep myself busy with small stuff, fixing things around the house, clearing brush when it needs it, checking the fence line even though nothing ever really messes with it. Sometimes I'll drive into town for groceries or just to see other people for a bit, but I don't stay long. Never been much for crowds. I like coming back out here where it's quiet. Evenings are my favorite part of the day. I'll sit out on the porch or walk a bit out into the yard where I've got a clear view of the sky. You can see a lot out here with no light pollution. Planes are easy to spot, blinking steady as they cross over. Satellites too, moving slow and straight if you catch them at the right time. I've spent enough nights looking up that I can usually tell what I'm seeing within a few seconds. That's kind of why this is bothering me as much as it is. I'm used to things making sense out here. Even when something seems strange at first, there's always been an explanation if you think about it long enough. The woods creak, animals move around, wind does weird things sometimes. It's never felt unpredictable, just quiet. I never felt watched before either. It all started on a night like any other. I remember the night pretty clearly because nothing else about it stood out at first. It was calm, no wind really, sky was clear. One of those nights where the stars looked sharper than usual. I was out in the yard like I usually am, maybe a little farther out than the porch, just standing there and looking up. I had a cup of coffee with me, even though it was late. I do that sometimes. Helps me stay up a bit longer. At first I thought I was looking at a plane, just out of habit. There was a light out there, off in the distance, kind of low compared to where planes usually are when I noticed them. But something about it didn't line up. It wasn't blinking, just a steady glow. Then I noticed there wasn't just one. There were three of them, spread out a bit, not in a straight line or anything clean like that. They were just there, hanging. I don't know how else to put it. Not moving across the sky like anything I've seen before. Just sitting in place, like they had decided to stop midair. I remember lowering my cup and just staring, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was drones, but that didn't sit right. Too high up, too still, and there wasn't any sound. Out here, you hear everything, even something small carries. After a minute or so, could have been less, could have been more. Time felt a little off. They started moving, but not in a way that made it easier to understand. They didn't take off like a plane or drift like something caught in the wind. They sort of slid. That's the best word I've got. Smooth, controlled, no change in brightness, no blinking. Just moving across the sky in a way that didn't look natural. And they weren't staying evenly spaced either. One would move a little faster, then slow, like they were adjusting to each other. I remember feeling this weird mix of curiosity and something else I can't really describe. Not fear exactly, just a sense that I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to be seeing. I set the cup down on the ground without really thinking about it. I didn't want to look away, not even for a second. I kept trying to track them, telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Military maybe, something experimental. I'm not that far from the lake. Maybe they were out over the water doing something. But then they all shifted direction at the same time. Not a gradual turn. Not like anything banking or correcting course. It was instant. 1 second they were moving across my field of view. The next they were heading straight toward the lake. All three of them, like they had been given the same signal. And they picked up speed. That's when it started to feel wrong. They got smaller fast, but not because they were dimming out. Just distance. They stayed just as bright, just as solid looking, until they were far enough out that they were almost pinpoints again. And then they were gone. Not fading, not dipping below the horizon where I could track them. Just gone. Like someone flipped a switch. I stood there for a while after that, longer than I probably realized. I remember the quiet hitting me all at once. It felt heavier somehow. I could hear the trees again, a little bit of movement, and the lake in the distance. Everything normal coming back, but it didn't feel the same. I picked my cup back up eventually and went inside. I didn't stay out there after that. I tried to talk myself through it. Satellites can look weird sometimes. Maybe it was some kind of reflection, or a trick of perspective. I even looked up if there were any exercises, or anything going on over the lake. Didn't find much that made sense. What stuck with me wasn't just what I saw. It was how it moved. The way it stopped. The way it changed direction. It didn't feel random. It felt controlled. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been over my property before it left. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I thought something was coming back or anything like that. I just kept replaying it in my head, trying to line it up with something I already understood. I still can't. The next few days were normal on the surface, at least if you were just looking at my routine. I still got up early, still made coffee, still went about the same small tasks around the house. Nothing obvious had changed, but it didn't feel the same. The quiet out here has always been something I liked. It used to feel calm, steady. After that night, it started to feel off, like there was something underneath that I hadn't noticed before. I caught myself pausing a lot, just standing there and listening harder than I needed to, like I was expecting to hear something else layered in. I started leaving more lights on at night too. Not all of them, but enough that the house didn't feel as dark. I told myself it was just habit, but it wasn't. I don't usually do that. I've lived out here long enough to be comfortable in the dark. I went outside a couple times after that, but not the same way. Before, I'd stand out in the yard for a while, just looking up without thinking much about it. Now I'd step out, look around quick, then go back in. I kept checking the sky like I was expecting to see those lights again, and at the same time I didn't want to. There were small things too. Could have been nothing. Probably were nothing, but I noticed them more than I should have. A couple nights it felt quieter than usual, like even the insects had cut out for a bit. Once or twice I thought I heard something faint out near the tree line, but when I stopped to listen it was gone. No movement, no follow-up, just silence. The weirdest part is I started getting this feeling like I was being watched. Not all the time, just in short moments that would come and go. Enough to make me turn my head or look over my shoulder. I never used to do that. It was a few nights after that when it happened again. I had been trying to act normal, telling myself I was reading too much into things. That night I went to bed later than usual, mostly because I couldn't settle. Nothing felt right, but I figured sleep would fix it like it usually does. I remember waking up before I fully realized I was awake. At first I thought I'd just rolled over or something had made a noise outside. The house was quiet in that deep way it gets at night out here, where you can hear the building itself settling if you listen long enough. I was still half asleep, just laying there looking at the ceiling. Then I noticed something near the window. My bedroom window faces part of the yard and a stretch of trees beyond it. There's a bit of porch light that spills through, just enough to outline shapes, but not enough to make everything clear. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, like a branch or something moved wrong, but it wasn't outside anymore. It was right at the window. I don't even remember deciding to look over. My eyes just went there. And for a second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. There was a face there, not pressed against the glass, not distorted like a reflection or anything like that, just there looking in. It was pale grayish. The shape of it wasn't right in a way I can't really explain without sounding ridiculous. The eyes were what stuck most. Too large, too dark, like they took up more of the face than they should have. We saw each other for maybe a second, maybe less, but it felt longer. I remember my body locking up. Not like I chose to stay still. I just couldn't move. I don't know if I made a sound or not. I don't think I did. Everything in me just went cold. And then it moved. Not turned, not stepped back. It darted away. Fast. Too fast for something that size. Disappearing out of view in what felt like an instant. No footsteps, no rustling. Nothing hitting the ground or brushing against the outside wall. Just gone. I stayed frozen in bed for a while after that. I don't know how long. I remember trying to convince myself I was still half asleep, that I had dreamt it while waking up, that it was some kind of hallucination, but I couldn't shake the detail of it. The clarity, the way it looked directly at me, like it knew I was there. Eventually I got up and checked the window. I don't know why. I guess I needed to prove to myself there was nothing there. Outside looked normal. The yard, the trees, everything just sitting still like it always does. No signs of anything being there. No prints, no marks on the glass, nothing disturbed. I checked the locks anyway. Then I checked them again. I didn't go back to sleep right away after that. I just sat in the other room with a light on, trying to keep my mind from running in circles. I kept telling myself it was a deer, or a trick of reflection, or something my brain filled in, because I was already on edge from the other night. But none of those explanations really fit what I saw. That was the first time I actually felt afraid in my own house. Everything was normal after that, until a few nights after the window incident. I wish I could say there was some build-up or warning, but there really wasn't. The day itself was completely normal. I did my usual routine, tried to keep my mind busy, even went out on the porch that evening like I used to, but I didn't stay out long. It just didn't feel the same anymore. I went to bed earlier than I had been. I was exhausted in a way that sleep didn't really fix anymore. The kind of tired that sits in your head more than your body. I remember lying there thinking I'd finally get a full night of rest. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I couldn't move. That was the first thing I realized. Not fully awake, not fully asleep either. Just aware. My eyes were open. I could see the room, but my body felt completely locked in place. I've heard of sleep paralysis before, so at first that's what I told myself it had to be. I've never experienced it, but I know enough about it to recognize the basics. Except something felt off almost immediately. The room wasn't just dark. It felt occupied. At first I thought I was imagining it, like my mind was trying to fill in shapes from shadows. But then I noticed movement outside my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate movement. Not random, shifting like light or branches or anything like that. There were figures in the hallway. Shadowy at first, but more solid the longer I looked. Humanoid shapes. Tall, thin. Wrong in proportion, the same way I remembered from the window. Grayish, but mostly just darker than the space around them. They weren't rushing. They were moving like they already knew where everything was. I remember trying to force myself to move, to speak, to do anything. Nothing worked. It felt like my body wasn't responding at all, like I wasn't fully inside it. One of them stopped. It was just outside my door, not looking directly at me at first, just standing there like it was listening. Then slowly, it turned its head toward the room, toward me. I don't know how I know that, but I do. Even without seeing clear features, I could feel that attention lock onto me. Like being noticed wasn't just visual, it was something else. The others kept moving behind it, but slower now, almost like they were waiting. There was no sound, no footsteps I could hear, no creaks in the floor, nothing. Just that same heavy silence from outside, except now it was inside the house too. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time didn't feel consistent. I just remember trying to breathe slowly, trying not to panic, because panic didn't seem like it would help anything. At some point, I think I lost focus. Not like I fell asleep exactly, more like everything just slipped. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up normally. Morning light coming through the window. The house completely quiet again. No figures, no movement, nothing in the hallway. I got up and checked anyway. Every room, every corner I could see from the hallway. Nothing was there, but the feeling didn't leave right away. Even now, I still don't fully know what that was. Sleep paralysis is the easiest explanation. It fits parts of it, but it doesn't explain everything I saw. And it definitely doesn't explain the sense that I wasn't the only one awake in the house. I didn't tell anyone in my life about this right away. I still haven't really. It's hard to explain something like this without sounding like you've completely lost it. And I've spent enough years out here knowing how people react to stories that don't fit into normal categories. After that last night, I stopped sleeping properly. Not in a dramatic way, just lighter sleep. Waking up more often, checking rooms without thinking about it. Sometimes I'll sit up in bed and just listen for a while before I even decide to move. The house is still the same, but it doesn't feel the same anymore. Nothing else has happened since then, at least nothing I can clearly point to. No more lights in the sky, no figures at the window. But that almost makes it worse in a way. Like it was enough to get my attention and then stop. I keep going back over everything trying to line it up logically. Drones, hallucinations, sleep paralysis, maybe stress or lack of sleep affecting perception. I've read about all of it. I've tried to convince myself that's all it was. And some parts of it probably could be explained that way if you isolate them. But not all of it together. The way the lights moved, the way the figure at the window reacted, the feeling of awareness in the hallway. It all feels connected in a way I can't really ignore anymore. I'm not posting this because I expect anyone to give me a definitive answer. I don't think there is one. I think I just wanted to put it somewhere outside my head for a change, because keeping it in there makes it worse. Maybe someone else out there has had something similar happen and just never said anything. Or maybe there's a simple explanation I haven't thought of yet. I'm open to that. I really am. But right now, I just know what I experienced. And I know I haven't felt fully alone in this house since it started.
Hi everyone, I don't usually post on places like this, and I'm not the type to jump to conclusions about things I can't explain. I've spent over 30 years hauling freight across this country, mostly night runs, and I know what I'm looking at when I'm under an open sky. Planes, satellites, drones, flares, whatever it is, I've seen most of the usual explanations with my own eyes. That's why I'm writing this, because what I've been seeing out here in the Nevada desert doesn't line up with any of it. I'm retired now, living off an old stretch of highway that doesn't get much traffic anymore. It's quiet most nights, just wind, the occasional truck in the distance, and the sky stretching out like it owns everything. I still go out at night sometimes, habit I guess, just sit by the cab of my old rig and watch the sky move the way it always has. But a few weeks back, something changed. At first it was just lights. Too many to ignore, but still far off. They were moving in a way I can only describe as too clean. No blinking, no variance, just steady points moving across the sky like they were following something invisible. I told myself it was aircraft out of the usual training corridors nearby. That would have made sense. It usually does out here. But then more of them showed up. And they weren't scattered. They were aligned. Like lanes on a highway, but suspended overhead. I didn't hear a thing. No engine roar, no Doppler shift, nothing passing through the air the way it should. I've been trying to write it off ever since, but it keeps coming back to me when I'm out there at night. Like I'm seeing something I wasn't supposed to notice, even though it was right above me the whole time. Most days out here don't change much, and I keep it that way on purpose. Routine makes things easier to ignore. The desert helps with that too. There's nothing out here that demands your attention unless you let it. I wake up whenever I wake up. No alarm anymore. First thing is always the same, check the truck, even if I haven't driven it in days. Old habit from the road. Tires, fluids, battery. You learn to respect machines when you've depended on them your whole life. Out here, if something breaks and you didn't catch it early, you're on your own in a way most people don't really understand. After that, I usually sit outside with coffee and just look at the sky. It sounds simple, maybe even pointless, but it's not. The airspace over this part of Nevada is busy in a way most people don't think about. Military routes, testing corridors, training flights. Sometimes you'll see formations of aircraft pass far overhead, moving in tight schedules. I've watched it for years. You start to recognize patterns without trying. Timing, direction, spacing. Even altitude changes become familiar if you pay attention long enough. That's part of why I've always been confident in what I see up there. I'm not guessing. I know what commercial jets look like at cruising altitude. I know what helicopters sound like before you see them. I know what drones look like when they're closer than they should be. Out here, there's not much room for mystery when it comes to man-made things in the sky. Twice a week I drive into town for supplies. Same route, same stops. Gas, food, sometimes parts if I need them. People are friendly enough, but conversations are short. Not much changes for them either. On the way back, once you leave the last cluster of buildings, it's just open desert and old highway lines cutting through it. At night I'll sit in the cab or outside depending on the weather. I keep an old CB radio running more out of habit than anything else. Most channels are dead or just static now, but I like the background noise. It makes the silence feel less complete. The sky at night out here is sharp. No city glow, no interference. You can see everything clearly enough that you stop questioning most things you see. That's how it's always been. Until recently, anyway. It started on a night that didn't feel different at first. There wasn't anything unusual about it when I went outside. Same dry air, same quiet stretch of highway fading off into nothing on both sides. Wind coming in light from the west, just enough to move the sagebrush without making a sound you could really focus on. I remember thinking I might actually turn in early for once, because nothing had been moving overhead that evening except the usual slow traffic of jets far up at altitude. I was standing by the cab of my truck when I noticed the first lights. They were low on the horizon, too low for commercial flight paths I'm used to seeing out here. At first I assumed it was a small group of aircraft coming in from one of the military corridors. That wouldn't have been strange. You get training runs sometimes that spill over into this part of the sky depending on weather and routing. But something about them didn't sit right. They were moving in formation, yes, but it wasn't the kind of loose formation you see with jets or helicopters. It was tight. Too tight. Perfect spacing, like each point of light was locked into a fixed position relative to the others. No drift, no correction movements. Just a clean line of motion across the sky. And there was no sound. That was the first real thing that made me stop trying to explain it away. Even at that distance, you expect something. Jet engines don't care how high up they are, you still get a low hum if the conditions are right, or at least some distortion in the air. But there was nothing. Just silence and movement. I watched them for maybe a minute before I realized there were more. Another set appeared above the first, then another below it. Like layers forming in the sky. Not random either. They were aligned horizontally, moving in parallel paths, as if the entire sky had invisible lanes that something was traveling through. It reminded me of highway traffic at night when you're cresting a hill and seeing the headlights spread across multiple directions, but stretched across the entire dome of the sky. I remember stepping away from the truck without really thinking about it, just trying to get a better angle. The desert makes distances hard to judge, but these weren't close. They were far enough that I should have seen atmospheric flicker or blinking navigation lights if they were conventional aircraft. Instead, each point was steady. Constant. No blinking at all. I told myself it had to be military. Some kind of coordinated exercise. That's usually where your mind goes when you've spent decades near restricted airspace. But even that explanation started falling apart the longer I watched. Because the movement wasn't just coordinated, it was synchronized. Like they were all responding to the same invisible timing system. No lag between layers. No variation in speed. Just a clean, mechanical flow across the sky that didn't behave like anything I've ever seen in real air traffic. Then, without warning, the whole formation began shifting direction slightly. Not turning, exactly. more like adjusting its path in a way that didn't disturb the spacing. And as it moved, the entire structure seemed to dip behind a distant ridge of mountains on the horizon. That part bothered me more than anything else. Because they didn't descend into it. They passed behind it, like the mountains weren't a physical barrier at all. No fading glow, no gradual occlusion from distance, just clean disappearance behind solid terrain. I stood there for a long time after that, waiting for something else to happen. A sound. A second pass. Anything that would make it make sense again. Nothing came. Just the desert, the wind, and a sky that looked normal again, like nothing had happened at all. But I knew what I saw didn't fit into anything I could explain cleanly. And once you've spent enough time out here alone at night, you learn to trust the difference between something you don't understand and something that isn't supposed to be there in the first place. My next brush with this stuff happened on a run I probably shouldn't have been doing that late, but I've always preferred night driving. Less traffic, less distraction, and out here in Nevada, the roads can feel like they belong to you if you're the only one on them. It was just after midnight when things started to feel off. At first it was subtle. The dash lights in the truck flickered once, then steadied. I assumed it was a voltage issue. I've dealt with that before in older rigs, especially when the alternator starts acting up. But then the CB radio came alive with a burst of static that didn't taper off like normal interference. It just hit hard, then stopped completely, like someone had cut the signal. A few seconds later, the engine hesitated. Not a full stall. Just a brief loss of power, like it had skipped a beat. The truck kept rolling, but I eased off the accelerator out of instinct. That's when the headlights started to dim and brighten in a slow rhythm I couldn't explain mechanically. I pulled over on the shoulder of the highway, right out in open desert. No buildings, no trees, just flat land and distant mountains cutting into the horizon. I left the engine running at first, thinking it might clear itself, but the noise from the cab felt wrong. Too inconsistent. I shut it off. That's when it got quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Not just absence of sound, but something heavier, like the air itself had settled. I stepped out of the truck to check under the hood. That's when I noticed the sky had changed. There was a structure to it again. Not as obvious as the first encounter, but there. Faint lines of movement far overhead, arranged in those same parallel paths I'd seen before. It took me a second to realize they were moving faster than before, or maybe I was just closer this time than I thought. Then I heard nothing. No wind. No insects. Even the distant hum of the truck engine had faded completely, like it was cut off from me instead of just turned off. I looked up again, and that's when the object passed. It didn't come in from the horizon like aircraft usually do. It was just there, already overhead, massive and silent. Not a shape you could describe easily. Not a plane, not a drone, not anything with clear edges or identifiable structure. It blocked out the stars in a defined section of sky, like something had been placed over them rather than moving through them. There was no noise at all. No displacement of air I could feel. Just presence. It moved along the same direction as the earlier formations, following that invisible lane in the sky. Perfect alignment. No deviation. As it passed, I remember feeling something like pressure change in my head. Not painful, just disorienting. Like my perception had slipped for a second. I blinked. And when I opened my eyes again, the object was gone. The truck was still there. Engine still off. Keys still in my hand. But something about the moment didn't line up right. I checked my watch and realized a few minutes were missing. Not a long gap, but enough that I couldn't account for what I had been doing or standing there thinking. I sat back in the driver's seat for a long time after that without starting the engine. Just trying to make sense of how something that large could move that close, that quietly, and leave nothing behind except the feeling that I had missed part of it entirely. I don't remember falling asleep, but I know I didn't plan to stop where I did. Last thing I clearly recall from that night was sitting in the cab after the second encounter, engine still cold, hands on the steering wheel like I was waiting for something to reset itself. I told myself I'd just sit there a few minutes, collect my thoughts, then head back. That's usually what you do when something doesn't make sense. You wait for your mind to catch up to reality. But the next thing I knew, it was later. Not a little later. Enough that the position of the truck didn't feel right anymore. I was no longer parked exactly where I had pulled over. It was still the same stretch of highway, but shifted slightly, like I'd been moved without noticing. The desert outside looked the same at first glance, but the sky wasn't. There was too much happening. At first I thought my eyes just hadn't adjusted. But once I stepped out of the cab, I realized it wasn't a matter of visibility. It was structure. The sky wasn't empty space the way it usually is out here. It had layers again, but denser this time. Not just lines of movement, but depth. Like I was seeing multiple levels of traffic stacked above each other. Lights moved in coordinated paths across those levels, all following the same directional flow I'd seen before. But now it wasn't just horizontal lanes. There were vertical shifts too, movements between layers, like transitions between altitudes that weren't random or weather-driven. Everything felt assigned, like positions in a system. Some parts of the sky looked wrong in a way I can't fully describe. Not dark, not blocked, just absent. Sections where stars should have been were missing entirely, as if something large and invisible was passing through and holding that space out of view. Not clouds. Not atmospheric distortion. Something else. And the movement didn't react to anything below it. No lights from the ground seemed to reflect or scatter upward. No sound came down. It was like the entire system existed on a plane that just happened to overlap with ours, but wasn't influenced by it. That's when I started to understand the pattern wasn't random at all. It was a corridor. Not a metaphor. Not something I was imagining as a way to make sense of it. It had direction, consistency, and repeatable structure. The same paths I'd seen before weren't isolated events. They were part of something continuous. A route. A flow. I remember standing there longer than I probably should have, just watching it all move overhead. The desert felt smaller than it should have. Like I was standing at the edge of something operational, not natural. Something used. At one point, I saw what looked like a gap in the structure. A section where the layered movement paused briefly before resuming, almost like spacing in a schedule. It didn't feel accidental. It felt deliberate, like something was timing intervals across vast distances. That's also when I noticed the radio in the truck was on again, even though I was certain I had left it off. It wasn't static this time. It was worse, low, pulsing noise that came in waves. Not voices, not code I could recognize, but repetition. Like something trying to establish rhythm through interference. Then I realized I wasn't just observing it anymore. It felt like I was inside the edge of it. Like the desert wasn't beneath it, but under it in a literal sense, beneath a route that returned to itself over and over, cycling through the same space above me like a system I had only just become aware of. I don't know how long I stood there before I went back into the truck. I just remember the feeling that I had seen enough to confirm it wasn't a one-time anomaly. It was something ongoing. And I had been standing under it without knowing for a long time. I haven't driven that stretch the same way since. At first I told myself it was just caution. Any driver would have backed off a route after a couple of strange nights like that. But the truth is I avoid it now when I can, especially after dark. I still go into town for supplies, still keep the truck in shape, still do everything I've always done, but something about that part of the highway doesn't sit right with me anymore. Sleep's been off since then. Not in a dramatic way, just inconsistent. I'll fall asleep fine, then wake up a few hours later with the same images in my head. Layers of movement overhead, lights aligned in those same structured paths. Sometimes I'll sit outside the cab at night just to see if anything feels different again, but I don't see it the same way anymore. That might be a good thing. Or it might just mean I'm not catching it. I've tried to rationalize it like I always have. Military exercises. Atmospheric distortions. Misjudged altitude and distance combined with fatigue. I've even considered radar reflections or something bouncing between layers of airspace. I know how that sounds, but I've spent enough years around real aviation to know when something still doesn't fit after all those explanations are exhausted. What bothers me most isn't even what I saw, it's the consistency. The structure. The way it behaved like something organized rather than random or experimental. That part doesn't line up with anything I know from decades of watching skies over this region. I'm not here to claim I understand it. I don't. I'm posting this because I want to know if anyone else has seen anything similar in remote areas, especially places near military corridors or long stretches of desert highway. Something that looks like traffic in the sky, but not like anything normal aviation produces. I'm not calling it anything beyond what it looked like. Just movement. Structured, repeating movement overhead that doesn't behave like anything I've ever known. If someone else has seen it too, I'd like to know I wasn't the only one standing under it.
I'm not really sure how to start this, so I'll just say plain. I'm a Hopi man in my 50s, and I've lived most of my life in northern Arizona and New Mexico, near where my family has always been from. I don't post much online, and I've never really told these stories outside of family before. Not in full anyway. I know how this is going to sound. I've read enough stuff on here over the years to understand how people react to alien stories, or anything involving strange encounters. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm not saying I understand what I saw or what my family saw either. I used to think these were just old stories, the kind elders tell to teach lessons or explain hard times. My grandmother used to talk about the ant people. She said they helped people in a time when the world changed and the surface wasn't safe. I always thought of it as symbolic, like a teaching story, something spiritual, not literal. But over the years, I've had a couple experiences myself that I can't easily put in that box anymore. And I've heard 2 stories from my family, from long before I was born, that also don't sit right in the normal explanations. The strange part is the similarities, the way things are described, the feeling people had during these encounters. And when I later started reading about what people today call gray aliens, it was hard not to notice the overlap. So I'm writing this mostly to get it out of my head, maybe to organize it, maybe just to see it all in one place instead of scattered in memory. I'm going to tell the 2 family stories first, then my own. That feels like the only way it makes sense. My grandmother was the one who told me this first. I was probably around 10 or 11. We were sitting outside her house in the evening, just talking while she worked on something with her hands. I don't even remember how the subject came up, but I asked her why she always got quiet when people talked about the ant people. She looked at me for a long time before answering, not like she was deciding what to say, more like she was deciding whether to say it at all. She told me it was something that happened to her father, my great-grandfather. This would have been long before I was born, early 1900s maybe, when life out there was still rough and people moved around a lot depending on water and work. My great-grandfather was out working alone near some mesas, not too far from where our family had land, but far enough that it was quiet. He was gathering materials, maybe herding. The details changed depending on how she told it. He got separated somehow, or went ahead of the others, and ended up near an area of broken rock and shallow caves. She said the weather shifted strange that day. Not a storm exactly, just a heaviness in the air, like the land felt wrong. That's how she put it. At some point he found what looked like an opening in the ground. Not a big cave entrance, but more like a narrow passage under a rock shelf. He went in because he thought there might be shelter or water. That part sounded like him from what I knew. Practical, not the kind to panic. Inside, it opened up more than he expected. Not just a cave, but something structured. Flat surfaces in places, tunnels that didn't look naturally worn. He kept going because turning around didn't feel like an option once he realized how far in he was. That's when he saw them. My grandmother always paused here when she told it, like she was repeating words she didn't fully like saying out loud. Small beings. She said they weren't like animals, but not like people either. Grayish skin, smooth, almost dull in the light. Large heads compared to their bodies. Big eyes that didn't blink the way ours do. They didn't rush him or surround him. They just noticed him. She said there wasn't speaking at first, at least not with sound. My great-grandfather described it as thinking that wasn't his own, like ideas were being placed into his mind. Not forceful, more like instructions or awareness. He understood he wasn't supposed to be afraid. That was the strongest impression he had. Not words, just that feeling. Don't be afraid, don't run. They guided him through part of the tunnel system. He never described being taken deeper, more like being shown a way out. At one point he thought he saw other people, or beings like him, working or moving in the background, but he couldn't say for sure. My grandmother always said that part was uncertain, even in his own telling. Eventually, he was led back to an exit that wasn't the same one he entered through. When he came out, it was late in the day, and he was far from where he started. He made his way back to camp or home. I can't remember which he said, but when he got back, he didn't talk about it right away. When he did, he told only a few people, and even then only in pieces. The warning, my grandmother said, wasn't spoken directly, but it was understood. Don't go back. Don't look for it again. Don't talk about it outside the family. She told me he never went back to that area. And whenever he heard later stories about the ant people in Hopi tradition, he never said much, just listened. When she finished telling me, she told me something I still remember clearly. She said, some things are not meant to be proven, only remembered. At the time, I didn't really know what to do with that. I still don't, honestly. This one comes from a different side of the family, and it was told to me much later, by my uncle when I was already an adult. He wasn't as careful with the words as my grandmother was. He just kind of said it straight, like it was something that had always been known and didn't need dressing up. It was his aunt, so my great-aunt on my mother's side, who experienced it. This would have been during a hard period for the family, sometime when drought and food shortages were common. My uncle didn't give an exact year. He just said when things were bad enough that people stopped talking about tomorrow and focused only on getting through the day. The settlement they were living in was small, not isolated in the modern sense, but far enough from anything larger that when things went wrong, you felt it quickly. Food stores were low. People were trying to stretch what little they had. Tension builds in those times in a way that's hard to explain unless you've been around it. My great-aunt was younger then, maybe late teens or early 20s. One night, she went outside alone after everyone had gone to sleep. My uncle said she couldn't sleep because of hunger, but also because there was a strange restlessness in the air that night. No wind, no storms, just that feeling that something was off. She walked a bit away from the homes, toward the edge of where the land dipped into brush and broken ground. That's where she saw them. At first she thought it was children, maybe even relatives from another camp. But something about the way they moved made her stop. They were small, low to the ground, and moved in a coordinated way that didn't feel natural for people. She couldn't make out details clearly at first, only shapes against the darker land. Then she saw their faces when they turned toward her. She never described them as gray aliens or anything like that. That's just how I understand it now, looking back. She said their skin looked pale, almost ash-colored under the moonlight. Their heads were larger than expected, and their eyes were too still. Not expressive the way human eyes are, just observing. She didn't feel chased or threatened. That's something my uncle emphasized when he told it. She felt watched, but not in a hostile way. More like she had been noticed in a place she wasn't supposed to be. She froze, and for a moment nobody moved. She said later it felt like there was no sound at all, not even insects, not wind, nothing, just absolute quiet. Then she remembered something her elders had told her when she was younger, about the ant people helping in times when the surface world became unstable. She didn't think it consciously at first. It just came back to her in that moment. When she blinked again, they were farther away than before. Not gone, just not close anymore. Like the distance had changed without her seeing it happen. She went back to the settlement quickly after that. She didn't tell anyone right away, at least not in detail. But over time, she did say things were different after that period. My uncle said food stores held out longer than they should have, though he always added that he couldn't say if that was coincidence or not. What stuck with me most is that she never framed it as fear. Even when she was older and retelling it, she didn't sound scared, just unsure. like she had seen something that didn't fit neatly into any explanation she had been given. And in our family, that's usually how these things stay. Not fully explained, just carried forward. I grew up hearing both of those stories the same way you hear a lot of things in Hopi families, quietly, without anyone trying to turn them into something big. They were just there. Like background knowledge, you don't question too much. When I was younger, I always thought the ant people were just part of our teachings. Symbolic stories, ways to explain survival, or remind people that help can come from unexpected places during hard times. I never thought they were meant to be taken literally. Even when I heard the gray alien stuff later in life, online, in documentaries, random conversations, I still kept them separate in my mind. One was cultural memory, the other was modern speculation. But over time, something started to blur a bit. Not all at once. More like patterns I couldn't unsee once I noticed them. Underground spaces, quiet observation, nonverbal communication, the sense of being helped or guided during crisis moments. I'm not saying I know what any of it is. I really don't. But I started to wonder if we're just using different language for the same kind of experience. Or maybe different generations are describing the same thing in different ways. That's the part one can't shake anymore. This one happened to me when I was younger, probably in my late 20s. I didn't tell anyone at the time because I honestly wasn't even sure what I had experienced, and I still struggle with it now. I was driving alone late at night on a long stretch of highway in a more remote area. One of those roads where you can go miles without seeing another car or any lights at all. I remember it was one of those quiet nights where even the radio feels too loud, so I had it off most of the time. My car wasn't anything special, but it had always been reliable. That night, though, it started acting strange. First the lights flickered a bit. Then the engine felt like it was losing power in short bursts. Not a full breakdown at first, just uneven, like something was interrupting it. Eventually, it gave out completely. I coasted to the side of the road, thinking it was just bad timing or a mechanical issue I'd deal with in the morning. I remember stepping out and noticing how still everything was. No wind, no insects, nothing. Even the usual distant hum you sometimes get on highways felt absent. I popped the hood, tried to check things, but I'm not a mechanic. After a few minutes, I just stood there, looking down the road in both directions. There were no lights anywhere, just darkness and open land. That's when I noticed movement off the road, down a shallow slope in the terrain. At first I thought it was animals, maybe deer, but it didn't look right. The movement was too coordinated, too deliberate. A few small figures were there, standing close together near the edge of what looked like a dry wash or depression in the ground. I couldn't see details clearly at first, just shapes against the darker earth. But as I watched, I realized they weren't random animals or people wandering. They were stationary for a moment, then shifting slightly in a way that felt aware, like they knew I was there. I remember feeling something I can't fully explain. Not panic exactly, more like my attention narrowed completely. Everything else faded except them. They were small compared to a human adult, with proportions that didn't look normal from that distance. Larger heads, thin bodies. The surface of their skin reflected almost no light. Grayish, dull. The kind of detail your eyes struggle to lock onto properly at night. I don't remember hearing anything. No footsteps, no rustling. Just silence again, like earlier. Then I had a moment where I looked away, just briefly, maybe a second or two, to check my phone or the car again. When I looked back, they were closer. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed immediately. I can't explain how that distance changed without me seeing it happen. My first instinct was to get back in the car, even though I knew it wasn't working. But something about the situation made me hesitate. It wasn't like being chased. It felt more like being observed, measured almost. Then the car started again, just like that. No warning, no slow repair feeling. It was suddenly running normally. The engine turned over clean, light steady, everything back to how it should be. I got back in immediately and drove. When I looked back through the mirror, I didn't see them anymore. Just the empty roadside and darkness. I kept driving until I reached a gas station much farther down the road, and I sat there for a while before continuing home. I told myself it was a mechanical glitch combined with exhaustion and night perception tricks. That would have been the simplest answer. But I've had enough small experiences since then and heard enough family stories that I can't fully reduce it to that anymore. What stays with me isn't fear, really. It's the feeling of being noticed in a way that doesn't feel human. This one is harder for me to explain clearly, because even now I don't trust my memory of it in the same way I trust the highway incident. It feels less like a single event and more like something that happened in layers. It was a period where I wasn't doing great physically or mentally. I won't go into all the details, but I was in and out of sleep a lot, and I remember spending at least part of that time in a hospital or medical setting. Not for anything dramatic, just enough that my sleep and sense of time were both really broken up. That's important because I've always told myself that might explain what happened, that this was just a mind state issue. Sleep deprivation, medication, stress. I still think that's possible. I just can't fully settle on it. It started with waking up in a room that didn't feel right. At first I thought it was just a normal hospital room, but there were small differences that made me uneasy. The lighting felt too soft, almost indirect in a way that didn't match fluorescent fixtures. The edges of the room didn't feel sharp, like I could see everything, but not with full clarity at the same time. I remember lying there and feeling like I wasn't fully locked into my body. That's the only way I can describe it. Like I was aware, but not fully anchored. At some point, I became aware of movement near the foot of the bed. At first, I assumed it was staff, nurses, maybe someone checking vitals. But when I tried to focus, I realized the shape wasn't right. Too small, too still. And there wasn't the normal sense of hurried human motion you get in hospitals. No clipped footsteps, no equipment sounds, nothing. Just presence. There were figures there. I don't know how many. 2, maybe 3. Small compared to an adult human. Grayish in tone, though not brightly lit enough to say I saw color in a normal sense. More like my brain filled in what it couldn't fully register. Their heads seemed large relative to their bodies. The kind of proportion that feels off when you try to focus on it directly. And their faces, if you can call them that, were not expressive in any human sense I can describe. No clear emotion, just attention directed toward me. I didn't feel immediate fear. That's something that still confuses me when I think back on it. It was more like confusion mixed with an odd calm. Like my emotional response wasn't fully engaged at first. I remember trying to speak or move, and either I couldn't or it didn't translate properly. My body felt heavy, delayed, like signals weren't arriving correctly. I've heard people describe sleep paralysis in similar ways, and I've always considered that explanation. But this felt more interactive than that. One of the beings, if it was a being, I don't know, seemed to be closer than the others. Not stepping forward in a human way, but just occupying a nearer position without me seeing it change position clearly. And then something happened that I still struggle to explain without sounding like I'm making it up. There was a kind of shift in perception. Not a sound, not a voice exactly. More like information being placed into awareness. Not words, but intent. The feeling that I was being observed for condition, stability, something like that. Not harm, not threat. More like assessment. It didn't feel emotional. It felt procedural. At some point, I think I closed my eyes or lost awareness briefly. When I became fully aware again, the room felt normal in a way it hadn't before. The lighting was harsher, more clearly hospital-like. The edges of things were sharper again, and there was no one at the foot of the bed. I remember immediately trying to rationalize it. I told myself it was a dream layered over waking, or hallucination from exhaustion or medication. That still makes sense on paper. I won't argue against it, but there's a part that keeps me from fully accepting that explanation, and it's this. I had a very specific sense afterward that something had been completed, like a moment had passed where I was not just dreaming or imagining, but being observed in a structured way, and then it ended. Not in a scary way, just finished. I didn't tell anyone at the time. I still haven't told many people in my life, because I know how it sounds. Even writing it here feels strange. I don't claim I know what those figures were, or if they were even external to my mind in any real sense. I can't prove anything. I can only say that the experience sits in my memory differently than normal dreams or hospital confusion. And when I later heard my family's stories again, especially the ones about the ant people, I couldn't help but notice how similar the feeling descriptions were. The sense of calm observation, the nonverbal communication, the presence without aggression. I don't have a conclusion for it. I just know it happened, or at least something like it did. After a long time sitting with all of this, my family stories and my own experiences, I started to notice something I can't really ignore anymore. I'm not saying I have an answer. I'm just saying there's a pattern that keeps repeating in different forms. In the traditional stories I grew up with, the ant people are described as beings who live underground. They show up during times when the surface world becomes unstable. They help people survive, sometimes by guiding them into safer places below the ground, sometimes by teaching them how to endure hardship. They're not really described as good or bad, just present when needed. In modern stories, especially the ones people call UFO encounters, there's this repeated description of gray aliens. Small, gray-skinned beings with large heads and eyes. Quiet, observational, often associated with medical-like environments, underground spaces, or missing time. People described feeling watched, examined, or guided in some way they can't fully explain. When I lay my family's stories next to my own experiences, and then look at those modern accounts, the overlap is hard for me to dismiss completely. Underground or hidden environments show up in both. Periods of crisis or vulnerability show up in both. A lack of spoken language or communication that feels direct into the mind shows up in both. And most of all, the emotional tone is strangely similar. Calm, detached observation, not hostility. I'm not saying the ant people literally became gray aliens, or that one replaced the other. I don't think it's that simple. But I do wonder if we're dealing with the same phenomenon being interpreted through different cultural frameworks and time periods. For my ancestors, that framework was spiritual and survival-based. For modern people, it's technological and extraterrestrial. But the underlying experience, whatever it actually is, feels consistent enough that I can't treat it as completely separate anymore. At the same time, I'm aware of how easy it is for the mind to connect dots that shouldn't be connected. I've asked myself that many times. Maybe I'm just forcing meaning onto unrelated events. Maybe stress, memory distortion, and storytelling are doing more work here than anything else. I don't have proof of anything. I don't even have confidence that my interpretation is correct. But I do have a collection of experiences, my own and my family's, that seem to point in a similar direction. And if I had to summarize my current view, it would be this. Maybe ant people and gray aliens are not two different things. Maybe they're two different names for something people have been encountering for a very long time, filtered through whatever language and belief system they had available at the time. Or maybe I'm wrong, and it's all coincidence layered on top of human memory. I honestly don't know anymore. I don't really expect anyone reading this to take it as proof of anything. I wouldn't if I was on the other side of the screen. These kinds of stories are easy to explain away, and maybe that's all they are. Dreams, stress, memory gaps, coincidence layered on top of old cultural stories. I've told myself all of that more than once, but I also know what it feels like to be the one experiencing it. The part that's hardest to shake isn't fear. I don't sit around scared of it happening again. It's more like a quiet awareness that there are things we don't fully understand, and probably don't have the language for yet. And that once you've had certain experiences, you can't fully go back to seeing things as completely ordinary either. I've spent a lot of time trying to separate what I was told growing up from what I think I saw myself. I used to keep them in different categories. Old stories on one side, modern experiences on the other. But over the years, that separation started to feel less stable. Not because I want them to connect, but because the similarities keep showing up on their own. Maybe there's a natural explanation for all of it that I just don't understand. I'm open to that. I don't need it to be anything else. At the same time, I can't ignore the way these things seem to appear in human stories across time, even in completely different contexts. Underground helpers, watchers during crisis, beings that don't communicate like we do, but still interact with us in ways that feel intentional. That pattern is what sticks with me the most. If I had to say anything to someone younger reading this, it would probably just be this: don't rush to force it into one explanation. Not everything has to become a belief system, or a conspiracy, or a certainty. Some things can just sit in the space of, I don't know. That's where I am with it now. I'm not trying to warn anyone about anything specific. I don't think that's my place. I'm just saying that, for me, these experiences happened, or something very close to them did, and they've stayed with me in a way I can't fully dismiss. Maybe that's all this post really is. Just someone trying to put memory and uncertainty in the same place and live with both at once. I'm still here, still living a normal life, still going to work, talking to family, doing everything regular people do. But underneath all of that, there's just this quiet sense that reality might be a little wider than the version we usually agree on. And I've learned to leave it at that.
Thanks for watching. If you want to hear more stories like these, please like and subscribe.